Before I ask you for any questions this morning, I noticed two things that I thought I'd share with you. The first is when I came into this room and sat down, you were all talking before then, and without my saying anything, I was very touched to see that you sort of gradually stopped talking and came to quietness. And it might be worth bearing in mind that whenever you're in company and you're talking about spiritual matters, which I suppose many of you do, because people like to talk about spiritual things, it's very helpful actually just to be quiet, to stop talking. You probably can't stop the others talking, but at least stop talking yourself. If you've got a chance, go outside the room and look up at the sky, for example. So one of the things you probably hear me say quite often is, if you're interested in finding the eternal God, just stop talking. Next to feet on the ground is probably the most helpful thing you can do. And the second thing I'd share with you is that both yesterday and today, as I was just getting ready to come out of my home to come here, I sort of went through my little list of slippers, spectacles, notebook, and but the real sort of preparation or luggage that you might expect to bring to a meeting like this is notes and all sorts of things like that. But actually the one thing I do not need to bring with me is really the most important thing of all, because it's always available, isn't it, without any effort whatsoever, which is this eternal presence. So it's nothing really that I've got in my bag that's of any interest to you. It's that which you've already got, which we've all got, which is always available. The help is always available. Never mind me sitting in this chair. It is simply this presence. And you can go anywhere in the world, and it's there. You don't have to pack it in your luggage. I suppose the only thing we have to do is remember it. Yes, that's the art, really. That's the work. Simply into this confusion of the mind, by practice, gradually try to remember, first of all, once a day. If you're lucky, then maybe twice a day. Then maybe you may be very lucky and remember it 3 times a day. And eventually, you might remember it quite often. In fact, so we're told the very, very wise people actually live there all the time, or most of it. And then we may truly be able to say, I lack nothing. And it's right here, isn't it? Provided for us. Without any of our doing whatsoever. Apart from doing that. As I heard many of you get up and sort of fidget around and leave meditation this morning, although my sympathy was very much with you, because you must have got wet coming here, probably were cold and uncomfortable. One of the nice comforting phrases of Jesus was, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so it is, my dears. Our legs, feet get cold and wet, and chairs are uncomfortable and all that. But We just have to do the best we can, don't we? The main reason for coming to a teacher is that if a teacher is himself anchored in this deep stillness, he'll be able to communicate that to the student. That's the point. That's why it's difficult to learn from a book, because it then just goes in at the intellectual level. You read, ABC or something, and you start repeating that ABC, but it remains at the level it went in, which is at this level of thinking. Whereas a teacher who is himself coming from this deep inner rest will convey that to the student. So the student is given a first taste of that deep inner rest. That is awakened in him. And once it's awakened, then it'll help the student to find it within himself. And the mantra itself has different ways of arising. It may find it's there without you doing anything, or you may be so full of thoughts you need to be quite sort of firm and systematic with it. So, it's very often when we start, there's so much diversion going on in the mind, you really need to be quite specific. If you're saying the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, so even say it aloud so that you cut through this interruption of the mind. And even sort of do it with your hand, Lord Jesus Christ, so that you've got something really to focus on. And then once you've sort of got your attention on the repetition, then you can go quieter and quieter and just let it go by itself. But every session is different, really. Therefore I hesitate to give you too many do's or don'ts about it. Taking the dog for a walk, you never quite know what's going to happen, do you? May I take you back to traditional, think back to sort of medieval days, really, the way the devil was described. The deceiver, the trickster, the fraudster. The devil will trap you. The devil was seen as an entity, as a malicious entity. I think it's best to trip you up, destroy you even. Well, what do we think the devil is, really? We've talked about sin yesterday, and you seem to swallow that okay. So who's the chief of all the powers of darkness? That which is called the devil. The ego. See, that which stands in opposition to the one. Because the ego is essentially separate, isn't it? It's me. It's not you, it's me. I'm the one that matters. The rest are they're just the others. Now this is completely contrary, you see, to when we get a glimpse of the one presence, which is all inclusive, isn't it? And as we touched on yesterday, you can even sort of refer to it as love, freedom, love. Well, we talk a lot about love, but usually we keep love within a pretty narrow sphere, don't we? And we certainly don't love most of the others, whatever we say we ought to do. Can't get away from them, can we? Quick enough. So, there we are. And another interesting thing you might have realized, evil, think of the word live, L-I-V-E. And then how do you spell evil? Have you thought of that? Got it? It's just the opposite, you see. And because everything wants to live, the ego wants to live, because the ego is created by consciousness, because we've given it life, we've given it attention, and attention is really that power of life. Whatever you give attention to magnifies before our eyes, doesn't it? If we think of coffee and biscuits, it takes over the whole scene for a minute, doesn't it? It suddenly dominates all else. But more important than coronavirus, isn't it? For the moment. So that's how it works. We give attention to ego, so we've fed it, we've given it life. And of course it wants to live, like all living things do. And so it's contrary, you see, to the real life, which is one, which is the surrender of me. A sinner doesn't like being called a sinner. It's difficult for us to grasp the really the totality of sin, how this whole world, again from the Bible, you see, is under the powers of darkness. And the prince of darkness is the devil, is the ego. And you consider, what you look at the papers, listen to the news, look at the conversation in the street, it's entirely ego-based. What's in it for me? Almost all conversation is on the ego. It's I think. How are you feeling? It's all separate. It's all about the separate ego. It's almost impossible to talk. And this is one of the good ideas, to stop talking, because you'll find that 99% of the talk is just ego. It's really funny, we just don't realize it. We go around saying bad things about the ego, but all the time we're performing almost nothing else but the ego. And what do you think the body is? The body is just embodied ego. That's why it's corrupt. That's what disease is. That's why it dies. Because it isn't real life. The body is just sin. As Jesus puts it, the flesh profiteth nothing. Try saying that in a public place. It gets much easier when you approach old age, because this is failing. In everything it fails. The mind fails. And throughout our lives, the body is a source of pain and discomfort, and achievement also, but it's a sort of achievement that comes to pass. It's a transitory creature, dear, a shadow of reality. Oh, it's an instrument for our use, a marvelous instrument while we're here in this world. But I love that phrase, it profiteth nothing. Well, it's very relevant, because what happens to the past and future when we're present? You shake your head. They fade out, don't they? But if we start thinking about them, how am I going to get home tomorrow? Immediately it expands, doesn't it? And then we lose being present. That's the trouble. It does take a long time, Joanne, in my experience. It's easy to understand just with words, but to actually practice it, that is the work, and you must be prepared to just work at it, day after day after day after day. Well, really, as I said, keep saying to you, it's best try to not to sort of think too much in these terms, but just to sort of get a regular practice and just do it. Just do it without sort of questioning why. You just do it because it's become part of your routine. You just do it. And then you'll find, without quite realizing how and why, when, you'll look back and you'll probably, you'll be with other people and you'll realize how they are not present as much as you are. By comparison, that's how you'll see to your surprise that you actually are making progress. That you have discovered something that most other people haven't. And that'll encourage you to keep working at it. I haven't lost my ego yet, dear. We don't. How can we? Because this is ego. It's, It's said of the greatest saints that they realize they are the greatest sinners. But who is it who's interested if you've lost ego or not? This whole thing of self-analysis about progress and all that, it all becomes, I've never had much interest in it really. Some people may do, but I think all this, you just get bored with it, do you? It all seems, yes, you just get bored with it, fed up with it. Isn't it strange? At one level, you see, life's full of problems, isn't it? And then we just sort of move up a few steps, and it's like Giovanni explains. It's all acceptable, all okay, even perfect. The imperfect becomes perfect, because what makes it imperfect is it's because it's in shadow, because it's all in our eye, really. It's our eye that creates what's called the evil eye. That's what sees evil. When there's darkness in your eye, you see darkness. When there's light, you see dark. So to the pure, all things are pure. That's the only problem in the world, is me. And this is the causal world. And when you spend your life trying to sort out the world out there, you're just really playing with one darkness with another, one shadow with another. You don't get to the first cause of it all. This is the fact that I've absented myself from the presence. God created the world and saw that it was good. Well, the world is tainted by our fall, therefore death has come into the world. Well, in a sense, in the greater picture, you see, it's all under law, isn't it? Even the man's fall is, we referred to it, I think, yesterday, is part of the greater picture. I mean, some people talk of God's plan. Well, I don't like to use that phrase. It seems to me we diminish the whole thing, but in our sort of childish human understanding, some people talk of life as a game, a performance, don't they? And when we fall from grace and have to find our way home, it's like a sort of game of hide and seek, isn't it? We get lost and have to find our way home. You see it as a game or a comedy or a tragedy, however you see it. We don't need to label it at all, but we brought the whole world down with us. I mean, it caused me so much trouble as a young man. Why do animals kill and eat each other? Why is everything in this world based on killing? We worry a lot. We spend a lot of time worried, saying we shouldn't kill each other. But what about the animals? See, they're tarred with the same brush, aren't they? They have been infected by our disease, just as the Bible says. Cursed is the ground for your sake. Now, whether that's reality or just a dream world, an illusion, well, you can think what you like, but how real it all is. Well, in meditation, as we know, you can forget about your own body, you forget about the world, don't you? So, well, you can play these mental games, is it real or not, forever, but we have to deal with it day by day, don't we? Let's come back to this presence. It's really important to keep referring back to this, otherwise we just go off in our minds. Now, if you feel this invisible oneness, see, this is the fact, isn't it? It's like a sort of an invisible holding. So everything's held, as we say, in God's hands, in this invisible oneness. And you can say that the power of this oneness, the sort of magnetism that holds it all together, is you can describe as love. The holding, the power of one. We fall away, and yet this calling draws us back. So this is a feature of all creation, isn't it? So we both separate and destroy and kill things, but also unite. And within this context, just consider what is desire and what are appetites. What is actually happening when we eat something? How does that arise in the context of this oneness? Isn't it really a love process? One of the most helpful principles of spiritual work that I've come across was what's called levels of consciousness. Think of, well, we use the term unconscious, don't we, when we're knocked unconscious. There's deep sleep, when you don't really know anything. Dreaming. Waking up in the morning, but very often we're half asleep. We don't really wake up, do we? Probably most of the day we're half asleep, daydreaming, thinking of other things. Something may happen during the day, suddenly wakes us up. You know? In meditation is also described as a process of waking up. You let go of the, you open inner awaking. You sort of, as like going up a hill, you get a higher point of view. It's just like that. Like coming out of the church, you look at the little town down below and you can see it. It's down there and I'm up here. Because so much of spiritual work is simply doing that, it's raising consciousness, so that you get a higher point of view. So instead of seeing things as divided, little bits of this and that, it all becomes one. This is really the process from separation to oneness. And then there are higher levels of that. Think of the old-fashioned paintings of heaven, you know, the various ranks of the angels, archangels, the fairies, you know, all these conscious beings at different levels, higher and higher, up to the Lord of all. Light, as it were. Light descending through various levels of manifestation to darkness, and eventually from darker, darker, darker to what's called outer darkness. Weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. So this is the process, isn't it, from light to dark. And we go up and down this process like a yo-yo, just continually. We're going up and down. And much of our questions and our confusion lies because we're going up and down all the time. We have a moment of insight, and the next moment we're back in the darkness again. And If people are meditating and I ask them how was the meditation, if they tell me, then I know they've got further to go. Because if you go deep in meditation, you can't describe it. You can't say where you go. So that not knowing is really a good sign. And yet, if there's something that just keeps pointing you in that direction, that's enough. You know, we talk so much about God, but who knows what God is? Nobody knows what God is. And yet, this indescribable, we can't describe it, can we? What is it? And yet we all respond to it. When we are there, we realize that all nature's at home with it. The child, the little girl's totally at home in it. This is where we all come from, isn't it? It's where it all comes from. It all just like a sort of out-breath of that. A sort of in-breath. An outpouring. Well, certainly as consciousness rises, we become more aware of the situation as a whole, don't we? As we grow up, yes, indeed, we have more experience. We take on board the human suffering. Seems to be an essential part of the journey, really, to take on. You see, again, we've referred to this, the words of Jesus, to bear one another's burdens. I gave you that little example yesterday of how I've had to bear the burden of seeing all that building inflicted on my grass, on my farm. Much later on in life, I told you I had several years in Russia, which was again a huge experience of me to take on the traumatic events that have convulsed that country in the last century, and my own family. And then what? And then, of course, bring it into this context. And then it's contained. And somehow, that's Again, the story of Jesus, isn't it? To bear it and submit it to God. Bear not only our own personal agonies, but the whole world. The work simply extends from my suffering, my own personal misery, to the whole world, but the process is just the same. And then you see it for what it is, and the heat goes out of it, you could say. There's this wonderful word, forgiveness, isn't there? Forgiveness of sins. What does it mean? Well, think of it like that. And this oneness, it's all forgiving, isn't it? It doesn't take anything. It makes no demands. It's just, really, it's like, if we're puzzled by God, think of it like the sun. The sun just shines, doesn't it? The sun just gives. The sun is just forgiving. It just gives its light, doesn't it? It just gives. Now, it's maybe covered by clouds, but it doesn't stop. The sun's still there, shining. We talk of the forgiveness of God. It is that. And see, whatever mess we humans make of our absence from that, it's forgiven. There's no condemnation. But indeed, Jesus wept. Russians have a saying, in Russian churches they don't have seats, you're expected to stand through the long services, which are much longer than what we're accustomed to in the West. And even the old and infirm, struggle there with their sticks and stand as best they can. There are a few benches, but not many. And their attitude, when I say, why don't you have cushions and seats in your churches? Well, a very simple answer. Jesus suffered, and so should we. Interesting, isn't it?